Welcome to the HFR podcast. My name is Anika Akhil, and I lead HFR Media. HFR is the established global leader in hedge fund data and analysis since 1992. To learn more, visit hfr.com. Amir Husain is an entrepreneur, inventor, technologist, and author based in Austin, Texas. He's the founder of Avathon, previously Spark Cognition, SGS, and founding CEO of SkyGrid, a joint venture with Boeing to build an aerial operating system to power the next century of aviation. He's also the author of two best-selling books, Generative AI for Leaders and The Sentient Machine, and co-author of the compilation Hyperwar, Conflict and Competition in the AI Century. Amir is a regular columnist on AI and business for Forbes. He holds board positions at Spec 5, Navigate, UT Austin's Computer Science Board, NATO's Innovation Advisory Board, and the board of Global Venture Bridge. Amir also serves as chairman of World Quant Predictive, a technological venture lab. His upcoming book, The Cybernetic Society, grapples with the inescapable reality of AI as it enters our homes, workplaces, politics, and battlefields. In the book, Amir explores the risks and opportunities attendant in the fusion of human life with computers that AI creates, and how it will shape the future of human affairs. Amir, a very warm welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Anika. It's an absolute pleasure to be with you.
So let me kick this off with, what's a technologist and what pulled you in this direction?
Well, in my case, I suppose a technologist is somebody who incessantly wants to build things and primarily wants to build things with instruments of the future, things that are tools perhaps that haven't fully matured, ideas that can one day become scaffoldings on which to build companies and societies and products and solutions. So in my case, that's really what it is. Somebody that since the age of 4 has been fascinated with technology, particularly software, particularly computers, and looks upon it as sort of a telescope for the mind, much like the invention of the telescope allowed us to explore the heavens and test our hypotheses about what exists in the universe. I think a true understanding of computation enabled by software and, of course, the underlying computer systems that run that software are similarly a telescope for the mind, and they are a simulational gateway into many possible futures. And that has been utterly fascinating to me, and everything else that I've done. Uh, the pursuit of artificial intelligence, which is obviously one such maturation of a tool that could change the future, and numerous other things have essentially been driven by this kind of incessant love for building. And it's not something that is by design or by tutelage. It's more by some sort of genetic fluke, I guess. This is just who I am. So I suppose that's one interpretation of the word.
That's very thought-provoking to explore that as the idea of telescoping into the mind. Sometimes I feel like, and I know you're a sci-fi fan, I feel like we are living in the movie Age of Ultron or some such. So I really want to ask you, intellectually, do you feel that AI should be embraced? And if so, concomitant with that, what are the things we should seek to protect here on a policy level?
Well, I think there's so many different views of this. And of course, in The Sentient Machine, much of the book was about what mankind does in the age of artificial intelligence in a post AI society. What is the purpose of human beings? But not to rehash all of that here, but it's to say that one can apply a very practical lens to this. One can apply a philosophical lens to this. If you apply a philosophical lens, the point here is that what is man's purpose? And there are many different interpretations. My view is that one of the purposes of humankind is, and perhaps the higher purpose, is to, in some sense, reverse entropy. Left to itself, there is disorder and entropy that increases in the universe. And consciousness is something that can reverse that within a bubble, not globally, but within a bubble. And so you can think of that as a sphere of influence, and every human being that's born has a sphere of influence. And applying mental faculties, which are uniquely human, to do what nothing else in creation can do, which is to bring order even within a sphere. That to me is a high purpose. And so with artificial intelligence, what we're doing is we're inventing something that will be the first known thing other than us that can do that sort of thing, that can be a builder, that can be um, an entity, a system, a machine that will be more than just a set of mechanistic rules and will be able to transcend perhaps the limitations of whatever we've built in the past or whatever we've observed in nature. And so I think that is aspirational. That's the philosophy of it. There's a very practical view. The practical view is that there are people who came together over thousands of years, built societies, built countries, cities, companies. Today, we're at a point where 100 years ago, 70, 80, 90% of the population of most Western countries was being employed to produce food. Today in the United States, it's under 2%. That for no one is a bad thing because the rest of the 98% are now able to go and do higher order things and build economies and build technology and build society and explore the moon and think about living on Mars and whatever dreams human beings have. But the only way you can do that is with technology that frees you up from the basic brutish reality of a human life. And so, in many ways, this question starts to get applied in specific jobs. And you say, okay, well, today such and such person delivers the mail, such and such person drives a truck, and tomorrow technology might do those jobs. And what we have to think of is there a higher purpose to shift to? And in my case, I look to the philosophical underpinnings. It is to dream and to invent and to build, and of course, there are those pesky details like who's paying my bills and how do I get compensated for just sitting and thinking, if many people imagine that to be a possible future. And there again, there are practical solutions, whether we have universal basic income or whether we have decentralized systems like blockchains, which we all own a part of, that track the discovery of ideas, if you will, an idea coin, which is a concept that I thought up of and wrote about in The Sentient Machine. It's not an unsolvable issue, and it's not something that attacks our humanity in the way that many people imagine.
So I know that you were in Davos recently for the World Economic Forum, and I know there were lots of discussions there on AI. And I think no one can argue that AI is now on the front lines in defending and altering geographic borders. Everything you've just said, it begs the question, how do you see AI redrawing economic borders, political borders?
There are two fundamental things about economics at a very basic level. One is there are factors of production. There is land, labor, and capital. And historically, these three have had a relationship between the three of them, and there's been a balance. Land is easy because there's no more of it until we go and perhaps colonize another planet. But labor and capital have always been in this slightly awkward dance. We are now at a point where many of the systems that have resulted from us wanting to balance these two things, the monetary system, the post World War II system of international agreements, the idea of what a state is, the idea of what is valuable and what isn't. All of those things have changed. I mean, the most valuable companies now are companies that essentially don't really have plant equipment and traditional artifacts, but rather essentially have intellectual property. They have software, they have algorithms, they have people who can continue to improve those. And those are the most valuable companies in the world. And similarly, and I think that as AI becomes a form of labor, for the first time, we de-link the ability to deliver on capital's desires by simply employing the owner of capital and the fulfiller of those desires, i.e., either a machine or man that can deliver the labor. That I think will create a disturbance in the force. And the thing that I worry about most is that if this is left unaddressed, there is this theory of clear dynamics, which has been put forward by Peter Turchin for many years. He's written a number of books. I talk about this in depth in my upcoming book. The idea that there are cycles, and societies destabilize sometimes when there is this phenomenon of elite overproduction. And by that, what we mean is that when there are only a certain number of points in a hierarchy in a society to occupy, many people in a developed society who've attained education, who might see themselves as deserving of those spots in a hierarchy, by definition can't get those spots. So what happens is that a prosperous society produces an abundance of elites, but the tyranny of hierarchy is such that there is only one president, there is only one vice president, there are only so many people in a cabinet, there are only so many CEOs, and so on and so forth. The number of slots that those people who think they deserve that position can occupy are smaller, and the number of people who are now unhappy is quite large. So Peter Turchin goes back and looks at history and says that it's actually not what was called the peasant revolt, which is the principal means for destabilizing a society internally. It's actually the disenfranchised, unhappy elites that light the spark that then causes the rest of society to go in the direction of chaos and destabilization. And the thing to worry about with AI is that there will be even less for this overproduced elite to do unless we rethink hierarchy. There are centralized systems that run our countries, that run our economies, and there is no structural way to account for a true democracy in the sense that you vote once and then you elect somebody, and then 4 years, 5 years, that person does whatever they want to do, and you feel quite disenfranchised. Maybe you get one or two additional asks down the road. But now the level of technology is such that democracy can be rethought. There can be a decentralized democracy, a digital democracy, in which a lot of people feel more empowered to be able to speak on individual issues. The level of knowledge that now exists in society that citizens now have is far superior. Today, we have technology that, let's say, when Bill Clinton was president, he didn't have. We learn of facts quicker than just 5 American presidents ago. So we are an empowered citizenry, and how can we rethink our democracies to make them more decentralized, to federate control, to enable people to feel that they are part of the system, and to prevent this problem of elite overproduction, which will only get compounded with artificial intelligence. So that is the core issue. And of course, the manifestations of unhappiness are many. There is the othering within society. There are rivalries which end up undermining institutions. There are numerous manifestations of this underlying disease. One has to think about systems which are more inclusive in the sense of being decentralized, in the sense of being things that allow people in society that feel they deserve, and they want to have a voice, to have a voice.
So it's fascinating. As you were discussing that, I think I just went through a full roller coaster of emotions, initially kind of feeling really sad and down about where we're headed. But then if I map it to, the examples you've given of technology today, especially the one about it being so easy to be informed today compared to just 5 presidents ago, it's almost a message of hope in that the drive forward of this technology is inevitable. And at some point, through these conferences, through these discussions, we are going to reach a point where we agree to cooperate and come up with rules of engagement and hopefully end up in a orderly, better coordinated place where we still have freedom of expression and democracy, but possibly with better rules of engagement.
And if you feel like you can be part of a solution, there's a tiny bit of hope that emanates from you. And if that then intermeshes with numerous other people in a society that think this way, then you have a hopeful society in which people come together to solve problems. My view is that none of our problems are unsolvable. And my own, the remaining part of my life, I've dedicated to what I call technologies of freedom. So I'll tell you, when I talk about technologies of freedom, what I mean by that is that I feel that there is too much power that cloud companies now have. If you look at the larger cloud companies, four of them, they have a combined market cap of over $10 trillion, $10 to $12 trillion. And all the unicorns of the world have a combined market cap of about three and a half trillion, and this varies, of course. This to me is ridiculous. There's over 1,000 unicorns, and all these companies is where a lot of the innovation happens. The large companies end up buying these smaller companies. But the way that this disparity has come to be is because these large companies are essentially rent seekers. What they are is that they have the capital to put up an infrastructure, and once that infrastructure is at a certain level, it's very hard to compete with that ability to raise a similar amount of capital. So the capital becomes the moat as opposed to an idea or a technology or superior execution. And when that happens, you basically become a rent seeker. Every startup, every unicorn, every company that can't have the types of cloud data centers that these three or four companies have take a part of their revenue and they pay them. They pay that revenue to these cloud companies. So I think that that kind of centralization damages creativity. It damages the possibilities in an economy. And I feel that that needs to change. So decentralized infrastructure, which there's a whole set of technologies that are heading in that area, those are very important. One of them is decentralized communications. I serve on the board of a company called Spec5, which is building mesh networks with very inexpensive devices. You get these devices, they tie up with your phone. You can send messages without actually paying a subscription fee and without having a physical infrastructure in the country, because each one of these devices piggybacks off the other device. And as long as there's a concentration of these devices over a number of miles, because they use long range radio, they can basically build a community network. So that is a good thing. My wife Zabe is building a robotics company, which is really all about, it's a humanoid that does manufacturing, but the idea is decentralized manufacturing. Instead of having concentrated supply chains where every little thing that you want, you've got to order from another country. Literally, you can't even order a screw locally. Most of these things come from foreign supply chains. So how can you bring some of that back? How can you use technology to decentralize some manufacturing? And robotics is one way of doing that. And the last thing I'll tell you is this company Navigate, which you mentioned, which is a decentralized data company that's built on top of a crypto ecosystem. But the idea is that all of us have data. All of this data is scraped by Google. It's taken by OpenAI. And they take our data and then they make money off of it. And what do we get? We get nothing. So how can we create blockchain-based systems where people can say, look, I allow you to take this data. You put my data in a data marketplace, and I will track what I put in that data marketplace. And that tracking will be done on a blockchain. And anytime somebody uses my data, I get some micropayments in the form of tokens back. So I become an active participant. I don't feel like I am the other, that I have been removed from the equation and people are simply taking advantage of me. So these are just three examples of what I call technologies of freedom in communication and manufacturing and in finance and data, where decentralization is the operative phrase because the connectivity exists, the intelligence now exists, the awareness now exists. Now, persisting with highly centralized monopolistic schemes is not serving a country or a society or a group of people. It's only serving the status quo and people with vested interests in that status quo.
That's fascinating. So, I can certainly get behind that final idea you mentioned and not having your data simply stolen. What do you think is most achievable in terms of transformative advances in the next 12 to 15 months in AI?
Yeah, so on the data side, this Navigate is about to be launched publicly here in just a few weeks. NVG8.io is the website, so actually it's free to sign up, and you can check it out and take a look at what they're doing. But in general, in artificial intelligence, on the model side, there is the shift from generative AI, large language models that can generate text, and then models that can generate images and videos, to workflows. This is just a kind of a one-time thing. You ask a question, you get an answer. But can I get these models now to be more accurate? And so that's one aspect of this. And how do you make them more accurate? Well, you improve the model architectures, you improve the quality of the training data, you also bring to the model tools like search, like what's called retrieval augmented generation, which means that you are providing that model with some library of materials, your books, that have true facts, and then the model can look at those facts and then come up with answers. And this has actually reduced the rate of hallucination, where models just make things up over time, over these last 2 years. But in addition to that, now there's also this kind of idea of models running over a period of time, and not just being a one and done, ask a question, get an answer, and you're done, but rather models actually having a bit of a lifetime and being able to run like an agent with a purpose, with an ultimate goal, and breaking that goal up into a series of tasks that they then plan to go do. So that agent based AI is now coming to the fore. If you look at the announcement that OpenAI made just 2 days ago, around deep research. That's a form of agent which can go and it can take 15 minutes and keep looking at things, and it might even invoke multiple fine-tuned models to get a collection of data, then look at it, then put it together, and do it in a kind of an iterative way. The Chinese company DeepSeek, their R1 model, is similarly doing this kind of multi-step workflow, an agentic flow, if you will. So that's one aspect. The third aspect. So number one was just improvements in the models and bringing contextualized data to the model, improving model quality. That's number one. Number two is extending the life of a model over a period of time, allowing an iterative improvement and allowing the pursuit of a goal to inform this life, this workflow. And that is agentic computing, and that's advancing and making strides. And there are products now that you can use. The third area is kind of the next iteration of what I call multimodality, right? So these models can do images, they can do video, they can do sound, but now putting all of that and embodying it in something that brings that AI multimodality, those senses, to the physical world. So when we look at robots, our Argon Mechatronics, our company, one of the things we look at is, okay, well, how much of the robot's functionality can an AI model control? Can you embody what otherwise runs on your computer and what otherwise generates an image on your computer? Can you embody that intelligence, give it eyes, give it skills to walk or to move, give it skills to move its arms? And can you then expect for it to do useful things in the real world? Can you build embodied physical AI? And that to me is another frontier. So the work, of course, in AI is just mind blowing. The amount of innovation, the new papers that are coming out, everything from the very low level, like these DeepSeek guys came up with ways in which they could train their models much faster. They could keep their GPUs running for longer with less failures. They could program more efficiently by being closer to the bare hardware. There's all that kind of stuff. And then there's the big stuff, which is take multiple models, multimodality, stick it into a complex robot, embody it in the world, see what can happen, and then have many of those and see how they interact with each other. So I think in the next 15 to 18 months, you're going to see a lot with robotics. You're going to see more and more AI show up in robotics. I think on the military side, you've already seen a lot in Ukraine, and the lessons of that conflict have been learnt in militaries all over the world. The Turks are extremely active in South Asia and the Middle East, and of course in the US and Russia. All of these places, China, there's tremendous amounts of development that are taking these lessons of autonomy and creating systems that will be able to navigate the complexity of what happened in Ukraine. So it's so multifaceted. I mean, if we talk about finance, that's a whole different world. So it's all coming in the next 15, 18 months, and you'll see big improvements in these areas.
Okay. So I want to focus on the fact that you're both a technologist and an entrepreneur. How do you assess whether a new technology is investment worthy? What do you look for?
It's become a lot harder now because the half life of technology is in question at a time when I myself feel that artificial general intelligence may be less than a decade away, let's say. It's the level of artificial intelligence that approaches human intelligence and in a general purpose way. And of course, now you're a machine, so you don't have to sleep. Now you can have sensors. So, but once you approach the intelligence of a human, all the other mechanistic implements that you can add to that system will make you superhuman automatically.
Mm.
So, if that is coming within the next, say, 10 years, something some people think even 2 years, but somewhere in that decade, then what is the half life of technology and what types of technologies ought you to invest in? We've seen that this idea of Sam Altman went to India very famously. Somebody asked him in the audience that, what is your advice to the young startups of India? Should we be innovating? And I mean, you've got a lot of resources. We don't have that level of resource, but what should we do? And he gave a very interesting answer. He said basically words to the effect of, it's hopeless to compete with us. You have no hope. And then a few months, weeks later, he gets upended with DeepSeek, which is a small team of only 200 people. So, that I think is going to be a very interesting dynamic. And looking at markets where there is some deep domain knowledge. So the entrepreneur brings some domain knowledge, and ultimately they are trying to solve a problem which can be solved very efficiently or maybe even completely automated with AI. But what attracts customers to that solution over the long haul is not just the technology. It's the connectivity with who is doing it. So if in certain areas you can create that, if you can create that brand affinity connection, then the technology becomes an enabler, but it's not very likely to get displaced. Another type of thing, of course, is where you look at things that there, more of them aren't being made in the world. I am very interested in physical AI because physical AI, when you start doing things which are back in the physical world, for the longest time, people didn't like those as investments because they were inefficient to run. The margins were low. There were lots of labor problems. It was a big thing to deal with. The amount of revenue, let's say, that Deloitte might produce with 200,000 white collar workers, and what a very large service logistics company or a factory might produce with the same number of workers. Big difference. So this became a low margin business. People didn't like that. But now there's an opportunity to go in and do business in the physical world and reinvent that. That's hard. That's not something that somebody can whip up a new AI model and just solve everything, because you still have to take action in the physical world. So I think for the next decade plus, those types of business models will intrinsically have a moat. So I think it's, again, brand, physical moat, and deep domain expertise that differentiates whatever you're building in software with everybody else in the world. These are at least three things that one could look at in an investment.
Okay, so quick question for you. You mentioned colonizing another planet. Do you support looking for livable conditions on Mars?
It's an interesting thing to me, just from a purely scientific perspective. But I think it's highly unrealistic to expect that the problems that we are faced with now on this Earth will in any way be resolved by colonizing Mars. And I also don't think that the colonization of Mars will occur in a time frame which is relevant to many of the most burning questions. Now, Elon Musk's view on this is that, let's come up with the big ideas. Let's think about the big things we can go do. And why not dedicate a small amount of money in the grand scheme of things, a small percentage of what we spend to go do these, big, and now you can't even call it a moonshot, I guess a Mars shot. I have no opposition to that at all. I think that's a great idea. But to present that, if anyone does, I'm not saying he does, but if anyone presents it as a solution to our woes or to our problems or the way in which we will improve our society, no, I don't think that that's where the improvement in our society will come from. By 2050, we'll be over 10 billion people. In some parts of the world, population will be declining rapidly. Other parts of the world, population will be increasing. And my concern is how we make the 10 billion people of Earth feel more like real participants in how they're being governed in their future. I feel that if you can't take ownership of a situation, if you don't feel any ownership of a situation, you're only your view becomes how to kind of undermine it or check out. And undermining is problematic. That happens at the fringe. And even checking out is not the kind of mentality that we would wish upon anyone. So, inclusion in the future, inclusion in feeling an ownership of the future, that is important. Those to me are the problems that I am most interested in working on.
Absolutely. So I guess one of the big ones for me is climate change. Do you think that AI can help with climate change, or is it really a case of chasing our tails, especially given, the huge energy requirements that so many AI innovations are going to create?
Look, one of the things that, going back to that theme of technologies of freedom, decentralized energy is another one of those. So, I was born in Pakistan, and I was very happy to read recently that Pakistan has now become one of the largest customers of Chinese solar production. And in fact, if I'm not mistaken, last year, the third largest. And, the installed base in the country of power generation was about 40, 45 gigawatts. And just in the last 2 years, nearly 60 gigawatts of solar panels have been imported into the country, mostly by private and commercial enterprises. So people are installing them in homes, they're running tube wells, they're running factories, they're all over the place. And it's one of the most rapidly solarizing countries in the world. So decentralized energy is, again, one of these things which um, solves almost all of the problems that we talked about, all the way from disenfranchising people and making them feel like they're out of the system, and now suddenly they have ownership, they can control, and they can produce their own power, and so on and so forth. So yeah, I think those types of things are extremely useful. They are economically useful. They help the environment. Another thing that Zabe is involved with is a nonprofit called Minus 15. The idea there is that in urban areas, there is, we've denuded a lot of urban areas, large cities, metropolises. The trees are gone, or at least they've lessened. Construction, concrete, uh, takes in the heat, radiates it back, cloud cover captures that heat. It really becomes a greenhouse kind of an effect. And these things are quite terrible. But at the same time, there are interventions like reflective surfaces, like obviously growing trees, like roof gardens, like all of these things. But the complexity of an urban environment is that the built environment creates microclimates. In other words, that there can be very vast temperature differences between one place and another place. And traditionally, when you look at like weather.com, what you see is, Austin is at this temperature or New York is at that temperature, but it's not all of New York and it's not all of Austin. So that micro weather picture where thousands of sensors can be deployed to really truly understand how the city is dealing with these temperature differentials. What features in the city naturally are enabling lower temperatures if the issue is heat. There were certain studies we looked together at a paper that was published. Work was done in Spain where they found up to a 15-degree delta between certain parts of Barcelona there was a park and then a road right next to it, 15 degrees. And that's where the name minus 15 came from, because we knew that it was achievable. So, she has funded the development of these decentralized sensors. And now over 100 of those sensors are being distributed in our hometown of Lahore, where on a non-profit basis, all of that data will be collected and we will build the most high-res temperature microclimate map of Lahore, and then incentivize people in places that are particularly in trouble to solve that with the kinds of interventions that I mentioned. And this is all obviously AI driven, because when you get that kind of data, you can start to predict. You can actually start to predict, and you can say that in the summer heat at night, most people that suffer badly or have some even pass away when it's too hot, and let's say you have a failure of electricity at night, you can be in your sleep and you can pass away. That's mainly when it happens, when your body can't cool down even at night. So you can do predictive models that show what areas of town have that risk, and the city can intervene and ensure that it has very specific areas to go to. So everything from being able to save lives to bringing down the temperature of a metropolitan area. And the technology we're developing, this is all just nonprofit. And the idea is that if you, let's say, plant a roof garden, or you do some kind of reflective coating on a surface, you will actually participate in a token blockchain system. And with that, we want to invite companies to help redeem those tokens with products. So, for example, you could have, let's say, a soda company give you, for X number of tokens, you get free soda, you might get free groceries, you might get some fuel, you might. So it becomes an economy that incentivizes good environmental action, where we distribute the technology and the computing and the AI modeling for free as our gift to the system, but where we aren't the owners. The people that are doing the interventions are the owners, and they're even the beneficiaries from an economic perspective of the value being created in the system. So that's one thing that we've got in the works, and it's just it's something which we'll see how successful it is or whether it works. But I'm sure we'll learn a few things, and it's an example of how AI can definitely apply to environmental causes and improve the situation.
That sounds truly amazing. I think one of the key questions I have for you is career advice for teens entering the workforce or priming to enter the workforce today, looking at the world as it's changing, and then career refreshment advice for people who are in the workforce and looking at all of this change coming their way. What would you say are key areas to address and how?
I think, first of all, anything that kids learn in school, most of it will be kind of, I wouldn't say irrelevant, because maybe, I mean, certain truths remain truths. But the practical technology and the skills that they'll need to execute, let's say, a high end career, will certainly be learned after they graduate, because technology moves so fast. In my case, let's say the programming languages that I built my early career on were not programming languages that I learned at university, because they weren't popular then. They weren't taught at university, and I picked them up on my own. So, this idea of uh, you are not in school to learn a thing and then execute that thing in life. You are in school to learn how to learn, and you're in school to learn how to ask questions, and you're in school to learn how to debate and how to get to the right answers and how to develop mental models of thinking, and you're there to develop your logical faculties, because those are tools that are evergreen tools, as opposed to the particular facts of a book of paleontology, which every 5 years there's some new discovery which upends the previous discovery, or in the case of computer science, a new language or a new framework or a new breakthrough. So that's one aspect. But even more important than that, Anika, is I think making sure that children have enough time and enough room to explore to where they chance upon what they love on their own. Um, my observation in life has been, and I was lucky because at a very young age, I was just put in a situation. I was in front of a computer that was doing a certain thing, and nobody had to say a word, and I just fell in love, and that has never changed. Um, so I would imagine that's a kind of an extreme case that may not happen with everyone, and so I think children need time to discover what it is that they absolutely love. And I think then, as adults, as parents, what our role is to talk to them about that and to figure out whether this is really well thought through and whether this is really a love or whether this is a mere infatuation. And once we are comfortable that what they have thought about is a real love that they will be able to maintain much of their life, and that they are evidencing love by thinking about it so much that they are giving you better ideas and better answers that you can ask questions, then you know it's happened. And once that's happened, you have nothing to worry about. If you do a mind experiment, let's say you and I walk into a Barnes and Noble or a library, and you are, let's say, a PhD in physics, and I am a PhD in some social science, let's say psychology. I say to you, I'll take you to the toughest book I can find on my subject as a PhD level person. And I hand that book to you and I say, Nika, read this book and make sense of it. You'll be able to read the book and you will be able to make sense of it. Now, will you know all the underlying, stories behind it and the work that was done to arrive at this conclusion? No, you won't. And that might take you a little bit of time, but you'll absolutely be able to pick up a book and you'll be able to read it. What that says to you is that you could have gone and done a totally different thing in school, but these other fields remain accessible at any point of time. Now you reverse the favor and you take me to the hardest book on physics in the entire library. And I am, let's say, a psychologist by trade. And you hand me this book and you say, Amir, open this book and can you read 4 pages? Forget about understanding this. Can you just read it? And I wouldn't even be able to read it. So, what that mind experiment says to you is that if you want the largest number of options to be open to you, do the hard stuff early in life, because that will position you to shift into the relatively easier stuff later in life. But if you build your identity around the easier stuff, the harder stuff will probably remain inaccessible to you for the rest of your life. If the question is for a kid, how do you talk to them and how do you explain these? These are 3 things. Give them time to find their love, test them on that love, encourage them to do the hard thing first, because that will open up to them all the easy possibilities, but the flip doesn't work. And, at the end, they turn out to be good human beings. What more can one ask for?
Absolutely. I completely agree with you. Amir, it's been so wonderful chatting with you, and I encourage all of our listeners and people watching to check out Amir's books. There's the new one, The Cybernetic Society, is coming out in August of this year. He has a website, amirhussain.com, and it's been just so wonderful talking with you. We could keep going, but I feel we have a time constraint, so I'll stop. Thank you for joining us, Amir.
Thank you so much for having me, Anika. It was a pleasure.